Sakura. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the program manager here at the Rethink Waste Project based in Bend, Oregon, at the Environmental Center. My background is in community-based wildlife conservation. The more time I'd spent outdoors, and the more I understood how our relationship with stuff can really impact our communities and other places and people and wildlife that we love. So I shifted into working on broader sustainability outreach and action alongside college students working at UC Irvine. And that brought me here to narrow my focus on waste and broaden my audience that I work with, which is you, the broader community. So here at the Rethink Waste Project, we aim to educate and collaborate with community members, businesses, visitors, policymakers around Deschutes County on issues, programs, updates, incentives, events, and more regarding municipal solid waste. The program is primarily funded by Deschutes County Solid Waste and is also supported by local garbage and recycling service providers. The Rethink Waste Project is one of several programming areas here at the Environmental Center. TEC is a nonprofit organization working to embed sustainability into everyday life of Central Oregon through education and engagement. Of course, we're not the first to hold this perspective. Indigenous communities in the region have been in good relationship with the land, water, and more than human beings here for thousands of years, and we're looking to contribute in a good way that inspires generations to come. And in addition to Rethink Waste, we work on advocacy around climate action and right to repair and more. Our youth education team hosts youth education programming. Our energy team works to educate on the importance of energy use, best practices when purchasing new appliances and EV infrastructure. And our garden program hosts an abundance of garden programs for communities and schools in the county. These program areas also do intersect and collaborate with one another, and we aim to reflect the idea that an effective environmental movement engages and reflects all people and all perspectives. So I want to start that by, I know there's a few of you joining us right now, so I want to start by asking your perspective, right? And why does it matter? What does Rethink Waste mean to you? So if you're on here joining us on live, go ahead and drop a comment and let us know, why does it matter? So what does Rethink Waste mean to you? And you can go ahead and type any thoughts you have down in the comments or the chat. So I can get us started here. We have upstream and downstream impacts that are really important. When we think about upstream impacts, we're talking about things like harvesting and mining resources, manufacturing, packaging, transportation, the habitat destruction, endangered species, air and water pollution, including the emissions and other pollutants that impact frontline communities. And when we think about some of the downstream impacts, we are thinking about contamination due to wishful recycling or lack of infrastructure understanding around recycling, in part because it's hyper community specific. There are impacts as far as e-waste, and when we donate without regard to what we're donating, there are impacts related to the donation and the reused clothing industry. So there's a lot of elements there. I see a few comments here around health of our community and conservation of resources. So yeah, all of those reasons are really important in why we rethink waste. And so you probably get by now that the big picture is that we really need to rethink our relationship with stuff. Both upstream and downstream, and at the individual behavior level change, and also at the systems and policy level changes. So that those key phrases that you've probably been hearing since kindergarten of reduce, reuse, recycle really go in that order for a reason. In part because the biggest impacts are often the choices that we make before the choice we make at the bins. So, I really think about recycling as almost a last resort, right? And thinking about reduce and reuse first. And of course, today on America Recycles Day, we're going to focus on recycling and talk about recycling right and why that's an important piece of the puzzle. So that's what we'll be talking about today. So we're going to start off with kind of a promising story of recycling. We're going to start with metal. So metals are a really great candidate for a closed loop system, or what we call circular economy, which means what we produce goes back into the system and stays in this loop, which minimizes the amount of materials and extraction that we are doing to make the stuff. So aluminum cans are indefinitely recyclable, which is the technical definition of recycling. This means that an item can be turned back into the exact same product over and over again, pretty much forever. So globally, we're doing relatively well in terms of recyclability, durability, and reuse, because nearly 75% of all the aluminum ever produced is still in use today. Metals that are recyclable in Deschutes County curbside commingled bins are clean and dry cans, soda cans, and foil. So hopefully you can see this image here of items that you can add into your commingled recycling bin. The soda cans, for example, or an aluminum beverage can be manufactured, filled, sold, and recycled, and then remanufactured in as few as 60 days, which is pretty impressive. So this is also great news in terms of upstream impacts, because mining for virgin aluminum is extremely destructive. Huge swaths of land must be bulldozed to access bauxite ore, and the process of refining bauxite to get aluminum is wildly energy intensive. In fact, producing new aluminum from recycled aluminum saves up to 90% of the energy required to produce new aluminum from virgin ore. So again, if you take one thing away from our chat today, it's recycle aluminum. It is indefinitely recyclable, and you can put it in your curbside bin, which is a great benefit as well. So some metals that are not recyclable in Deschutes County curbside commingled recycling bins are things like rebar, screws, hangers, and other scrap metals. However, they can be taken to a recycling depot. So throughout our conversation today, I'll be referencing these recycling depots or transfer stations, and I'll be referring to a number of materials that can be taken to these recycling depots across the county. You can find this map on our website. You can always feel free to screenshot any of these images if you want, like a handy guide, or you can access these resources on our website. But this particular map shows up on page 22 of our print and digital Rethink Waste guide. And you can reference the colorful dots on the right-hand side with the materials that are accepted in each of the transfer stations. So scrap metal, for example, is accepted in depots 1 through 4. What you can also see here is if you don't have access to curbside commingled recycling or mixed recycling bins at home, or a separate glass recycling bin at home, which we'll talk about in a minute, you can drop those materials off at these recycling depots or transfer stations as well. All right, moving on, somewhat metals adjacent are electronics. So Oregonians dispose millions of pounds of electronics every year. And these products contain hazardous substances such as lead, cadmium, and mercury that can really harm our health and the environment. And electronics also contain valuable materials such as copper, gold, and aluminum that can be recycled or reused in new products. So the landfill disposal, in fact, the landfill disposal of TVs, monitors, and computers is prohibited in Oregon. And while we want to be prioritizing reuse and repair, these are some tips for recycling at the end of a product's life cycle. So Oregon's electronic recycling law creates and finances a statewide recycling, transportation, and collection system for covered electronic devices. And those include desktop and portable computers, monitors, televisions, mice, keyboards, desktop printers, and each household can bring up to 7 devices at a time to one of the transfer stations. So again, while these materials are not recyclable in your curbside commingled bin, you can bring them into one of these transfer stations. There are also several other businesses that do accept these electronic materials, several Best Buys, as well as a place in town called Batteries Plus Bulbs, also collect electronics for use and recycling. So moving on to plastics, we'll start with some myth busting here. So you see these chasing arrows, which are sometimes called the recycling symbol. It doesn't mean anything as it relates to recycling. So it was a very successful marketing campaign by the plastics industry that has resulted in a lot of confusion for consumers. So moving forward, especially in Deschutes County, I want you to ignore what you may have been calling or may have heard of as a recycling symbol. It does not mean that a product is recyclable, nor does it mean that it's not recyclable. So it's best just to ignore that symbol, and on top of that, ignore the number associated with that symbol. In Deschutes County, we do not recycle by number, and we want to avoid trying to reference that number when you're recycling. So we'll go through what is recyclable, but I want to start here by making sure we're all on the same page here and not referencing the recycling arrows or the numbers. So in part, due to some of this misleading labeling and misinformation, there's been a lot of contamination, especially in plastics. So globally, only 9% of all plastic waste ever produced has been recycled. About 12% is incinerated, while the rest, about 80%, has accumulated in landfills, dumps, or entered our natural environments. In the early 2000s, our output of plastic waste rose more in a single year than it had in the previous 40 years. So looking upstream, since virtually all plastic is made of fossil fuels, the plastic industry's greenhouse gas emissions are on track to surpass those of coal-fired power in the US by 2030. So just another reminder that while we work towards curbing our reliance on single-use plastics especially, we need to be also properly managing all of that waste. So what plastics can we recycle in our commingled curbside or mixed recycling bins in Deschutes County? Before we get to that, one quick note on what labeling you can rely on is the Oregon 10-cent refund value label. So that labeling indicates recyclability in Oregon and that you've put in that 10-cent refund deposit, which you can get back through the bottle drop program at bottle drop locations. So these are typically glass, metal, or plastic bottles or cans that are 3 liters or less. So if you're looking on packaging for any type of labeling, that's one that you can rely on for recyclability. So moving on to plastics that are recyclable in Deschutes County curbside commingled bins. We have clean and dry bottles, tubs, and jugs. So keep in mind that what we refer to as plastic recycling technically is downcycling. So compared to an aluminum can, which we talked about earlier, that can indefinitely be turned back into aluminum or new aluminum cans, plastics are often downcycled, meaning that they're turned into something else that typically cannot be recycled again. So plastic water bottles that are recycled into a jacket, for example, or a trash bag. Most plastics can, because of their chemical makeup, be recycled just that one time into one additional item. So another reason why we want to be prioritizing reduce and reuse. So some plastics that are not recyclable in Deschutes County curbside commingled recycling bins are lids, cups, utensils, clamshells, mailing envelopes, the ones that are plastic on the outside with some bubble wrap, and bags. One alternative to sending plastic bags directly to the landfill is taking them to plastic film collection sites, which can be found at a number of local grocery stores. I also encourage you to get creative with reuse of these materials. I had a bag of plastic bags that I was collecting to take to a grocery store, along with some bubble wrap that came in some large packaging. And I happened to see someone in our local Buy Nothing group was in search of plastic film, and we ended up connecting, and they ended up using it as stuffing for some Halloween creatures on their lawn, and they'll keep reusing it through Christmas for additional lawn figures. So just keep in mind that there are alternative ways, even though much of these single-use plastics are not recyclable, that you can reuse or repurpose them. We're gonna keep moving on to another material, which is paper that's recyclable in Deschutes County curbside commingled recycling. So the types of paper we accept are clean and dry cardboard, mail, including newspapers and magazines, and paperboard. So paper is another material that is truly recyclable in that it can be turned back into exactly what it was. Although it's not indefinitely recyclable, it has about 7 cycles that it can be turned right back into paper. In the US, we recycle more than 60% of all paper and paperboard, and more than 90% of cardboard. So we're doing pretty well as far as paper recycling, but in order to keep those recycling rates up, we have to be on the lookout for some complicated paper products. And what I mean by that are materials that have paper or cardboard along with or mixed in with other plastics or wax materials. So those are items that we don't accept in curbside commingled, and really there isn't a good market for because you have paper combined with a plastic or a wax material that's really difficult to separate out in a recycling process. So once those materials are made, they have to be sent to the landfill or creatively reused or repurposed. So paper that's not recyclable in Deschutes County curbside commingled recycling are hot or cold paper food and drink containers, multi-layer packaging like chip packets or Tetra Paks, greasy boxes. So even if you have a pizza box that's entirely made of cardboard, if there's grease on it, then it cannot be recycled because that grease is considered contamination. Again, that's because many of these other materials have not just cardboard or paper, but also because there is a mix of materials that cannot be separated out. These cardboards are lined in plastic or wax. So what happens to the metals, plastics, and paper that are collected curbside here in Deschutes County? So trucks pick up our curbside commingled bins with our haulers, and they bring it back to a facility in East Bend, and the materials are often consolidated into 2,000-pound bales of materials, and then these recyclables are trucked across the mountains to a material recovery facility, or MRF, in Portland, and the recyclables and oftentimes trash that contaminate the recyclables are opened back up, so the bales are opened back up and put on large conveyor belts like the one you see here, where mostly people and sometimes robots sort through the garbage and recyclables into like materials. Then those like materials are then trucked to various end markets or buyers depending on the type of material. So one material that we haven't talked about yet is glass. Because glass breaks down easily, and broken glass is difficult to sort, it can harm workers and damage equipment. It can also cause problems in the recycling and sorting process. Glass is kept separate in most Oregon communities, including Deschutes County. So never put your glass in your commingled cart. However, glass recycling is available and collected separately inside Bend and Redmond city limits. So again, please do not put your glass in your commingled bin. However, clean and dry, clear and colored glass is accepted in a separate box curbside. So these are some of the glass materials that are accepted. Glass materials are also accepted separately at each of the recycling depots that we talked about earlier. However, glass that is not accepted or recycled, or glass adjacent materials are ceramics, Pyrex, mirrors, baking dishes, or window glass. So these are not recyclable curbside or at the transfer stations, mostly because the chemical processes of putting things together like Pyrex, they're meant to withstand heat, for example, right? So it's not going to be melted down well enough to be reused or recycled. And glass is also a great story. It gets pretty close to a closed loop recycling right here in Oregon. So we consume it. You can see this closed loop here. We consume it, then we can separate it out into our curbside glass bin or take it to a recycling depot. And it's crushed here in Deschutes County, and we call it cullet. And then it's taken to a facility called OI and melted into glass, into new glass, and they add silica sand, soda ash, and limestone. And the bottles are manufactured at the facility, are principally used for local beer or beverage distributors locally. So it stays fairly local as far as glass goes. All right, I'm just looking at some of the questions and comments here that may be specific to the material we're talking about. Yeah, somebody recommended when we were talking about some of the paper materials to tear up the clean, non-greasy bits. Absolutely, if you can do that, and you can recycle that paper or cardboard. There's a question about tearing labels off of glass recycling. That's a good question. That's not required, but if you are in the habit of doing it, you're welcome to keep doing that. And yes, definitely do not throw lids in the commingled bin. Yes, so when we talked about what materials are not accepted in our curbside commingled bins, that includes all lids. Those are not recyclable, in part because they're so small that they end up getting trapped in some of the machinery and really slows down and hamstrings the recycling processes. All right, I'll try to do a better job of looking back down at the questions here, but I will leave some time for questions at the end so we can focus there. All right, so I know we've covered a lot, but if there is one major takeaway here, that's say no to Wishcycling. In other words, if you're not sure that it's recyclable, then do not recycle it. Contamination is a major issue in recycling as it makes it more difficult, more expensive, and sometimes even dangerous for material recovery facility staff to process. So, that's going to be your number one. If you're not sure if something's recyclable, do not throw it in the recycling bin. Do not be a wishful recycler. Instead, you can take a look at the handy screenshots that you've been taking of our live here, or you can head over to our website at rethinkwasteproject.org. There is a Rethink Waste guide along with several other materials. So if you're curious about unique materials, maybe some things that we didn't cover today, you can head to our Find a Recycler or Reuser tool on the website and sign up for our monthly newsletter. We have loads of other tips and resources to help you rethink waste at both the individual level, like knowing what is recyclable or not, so we ourselves as individuals are not contaminating bins, as well as broader actions that you can take within the community. And get involved at whatever level interests you and that you feel is important. So before we wrap up here, oh, it's getting windy out there. Before we wrap up, I'm gonna shift over to a quick pop quiz here. I have some materials on the table with me that I'm gonna show on screen, and I want you to let me know in the comments and the chat box below what bin you would toss it in, or if you wouldn't. So first, we'll start with this. We'll start pretty easy here. All right. So go ahead and drop your thoughts here. I'm not seeing my screen very well, so I'm just gonna go ahead and go with my gut here and assume that you're guessing correctly, that this aluminum can be taken to bottle drop, or you can put it in your curbside commingled recycling bin. All right, next up we have this coffee cup, this to-go coffee cup. Let me know where you think that will go. All right, I'll probably have to hold it for a second because I think your responses are a little bit delayed to when I'm seeing them. So I will give you all a few to respond. So we have this to-go cup. I can tell you it feels kind of like styrofoam on the inside and feels like a waxy paper on the inside. And then this sleeve feels like cardboard. Yeah, I see landfill. So we definitely can take the sleeve off because it is fully cardboard, this particular sleeve, and we can put the sleeve in our commingled recycling bin. But this coffee cup is going to have to go in the landfill, and that's because, like we talked about earlier, this has multiple materials mixed in. It has cardboard, it has a wax, and a type of styrofoam, which cannot be separated out to be recycled in their source materials. So that will have to go in the landfill. All right, yes, I'm seeing your responses now. Cardboard can be recycled, the sleeve can be recycled, and the rest to landfill. All right, next we have this toilet paper roll. Feels like cardboard. Awesome. Okay, I want to address a comment here that says Subaru takes coffee cups through TerraCycle. Yeah, that's fantastic. I will call and check and see what cups they take. Oftentimes, coffee cups have different materials mixed in, so we want to make sure that when there is a specific collection stream like that, that we do get clear about what they accept and make sure that it's the right type of cup that we're dropping in. Companies like TerraCycle will offer like very specific streams of recycling. Always important to also think about how far we have to transport that in order to be recycled, right? Like if we have to send it to the East Coast or further, it always feels important to think about like what are the emissions and the transportation costs in getting that sent over as well. So this toilet paper roll, yes, we can put into paper recycling. And then next we have this half and half carton. So it's got a plastic lid and it has a waxy cardboard on the rest of the packaging. Where is that going? So similar to the coffee cup, because this has a few different materials in it, we can't separate that out in the recycling process, and we'll have to send it to landfill. A good rule of thumb is that anything that's meant to hold a liquid or get to high temperatures or really cold temperatures like a freezer, it's not going to be recycled because it likely has a wax coating in order to keep it from getting mushy or soggy. So the last thing we're gonna look at, actually second to last thing, is this kind of clamshell. It's a plastic clamshell. So this we also have to send to landfill because these clamshells are not recyclable here in Deschutes County. Again, the only plastics that we can accept are bottles, tubs, and jugs. So again, plastic bottle you could take, or a yogurt tub, but not a clamshell or blister pack. So the last item I'm gonna show, might be a trick question, is a pumpkin. You might have some pumpkins accumulated over the holidays. So where will you put your pumpkin? We did not cover this today. So your pumpkins can go, or really food waste in general. If you live within the city limits of Redmond and Bend, all food waste can go in with your yard debris or yard waste bin, and is also collected a number of the depots, the recycling transfer stations that we talked about. In Sisters, if you have yard waste collection, we can put vegetative waste in there, so just raw fruits and vegetables. However, in Bend and Redmond city limits, all food waste, including cheese, eggshells, all of that stuff can go in your yard waste bin. I see someone here said, why? And that's because those streams are taken to composting at the landfill site, and it's composted, turned into compost, and available for farmers and gardeners to purchase as compost. Yes, I see some other great ideas here in the chat. Give them to your goats or your pigs or chickens, and give your veggies and scraps another life that way too. All right, so we'll open up for a few questions if there are any. I think there's a little bit of a lag on my end. So if you want to drop any questions you have in the comments box, I think I'll be able to see that a little bit better. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and put up my email address, and just to thank you for joining us today. If you can't stay on, you're welcome to email any questions that you have or other ideas that you have or ways to get involved. We're happy to work with you. I'll just watch for a couple questions here. Looks like, why can't we recycle clamshell containers? So a lot of single-use plastics are meant for single use. And there's a little bit of a complex history there. Plastics, when they were first developed, were great because they were a durable, long-lasting material. But as the industry shifted to focus on single-use items, that durability in the use phase did fade away, right? Like, we can still use this clamshell for ourselves. I use clamshell sometimes to store ice in my fridge. However, the material composition of these kinds of plastics are not very valuable for recycling. So it doesn't create the kind of pellets that something like a tub, bottle, or jar would create. If you have really deep questions about plastics that we can't get into here, I'd recommend watching The Story of Plastics that dives into that. It's a documentary that is now also available on YouTube by the Story of Stuff group. All right, another question. Not the actual lid, the safety seal that's hard to get off. Yeah, so all lids, pretty much any plastic materials that are like smaller than the lid, including the safety seal, we'll have to put in the landfill it is, again, too small and can junk up a lot of the machinery in the recycling facilities. Oh, I think you're asking if it's hard to get off, if you can leave it on there. If you can leave it on there if it's the safety seal piece that's difficult to get off. I've also been able to cut them off if you're interested in getting to that level. Awesome. Okay, so I think the questions have slowed down a bit, so we'll hop off of our live here, but again, I'm available to answer questions via email, or if you want to message us any questions, we're happy to answer those as well. So hopefully you learned a little bit more about what's recyclable or not here in Deschutes County, or got some creative ideas for use from some of these comments in the chat as well. So thanks again for joining us.